Hi, Christian Baxter here. So today on the Yours Truly podcast, I have Kale Zelden. Kale is a prep school educator in Rhode Island. He specializes in teaching classical literature. He has his own YouTube channel at the Kale Zelden and runs his own podcast called The Underneath, and is also operating a Substack by the same name, The Underneath. I first saw Kale in the TLC on Grim Grizz's channel talking about culture, the God set, and the state of the future as he sees it through the lens of teaching the next generation. I reached out to see if he'd have a conversation, and he graciously said yes. So let's get started. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. Kale, what's up, man?
I'm great, Christian. How are you today?
I'm good.
Yeah.
This is still so wild to me.
Yeah,
all this stuff. Yeah, man. So
before you jump in, I got to say I love the name of your work here, Thinking Out Loud, as an unrepentant, unregenerate out loud thinker. I really appreciate that. There's a great character in Fyodor Dostoevsky's novel, The Crime and Punishment. It's one of Raskolnikov's very few friends. His name is Razumihin, and Razumihin is the classic out loud thinker. And he has there's a passage, and I should have it memorized at this point, but there's a passage in which it's sort of like a cry out loud for all of us people who like to process out loud. And maybe it should be a kind of an out loud thing we say about this little corner, because that's what we all like to do, right?
Yeah, it is. I've called myself like an oral processor for a while, and married to someone who's a very much more internal processor.
Oh, amen, brother. Same. We are same.
So I want to also say, I don't know if the word's happy Ash Wednesday, but I recognize that today when we're recording it. And I'm in a community. I've got my wife's family has a very liturgical, historical church background, and I'm actually observing Lent with an actual abstination for the first time this year. Mm-hmm. So, anyways, I just wanted
it's cool. I again, one of the things that I've loved so much about this little corner, all of us come from a number of different backgrounds, specifically, Christian backgrounds and non-Christian backgrounds, and I've really enjoyed that part of things. I think it's so important, to sort of find a way. I know this has sort of become a kind of tribe, this little corner thing, but it's certainly a novel tribe, and so that we're coming at it from different places. I just learned so much. So so we're heading into the thick. We kickstart Lent today with Ash Wednesday, so that's where this is. And and I teach and go to school. I teach and go to church at a monastery, and so they're really serious about the ashes. They don't just sort of faintly put it. They dig in and like shoot. In fact, it's kind of faded a little bit, if you can imagine it.
Yeah.
I taught a couple of classes afterwards, so I get worked up in class. These ashes they fly off. But that's why I've got this. I don't. It's not the same thing as the dark mark, but it's a dark mark on the floor.
Mark. So, so you're an educator and you do classical. I believe classical literature. Is that?
Yeah, I do great books, so I do everything in translation. So it's not like I'm teaching Latin works in Latin or Greek works in Greek or in Greek, but we are a school that is dedicated to teaching the great works of, again, broadly speaking, Western civilization.
So you go to church at a monastery, at a Catholic monastery?
I do. Yeah. So I've lived here for a long time now. It's and so it's every monastery has what they call a work, right? And some monasteries have a work, like they have a working farm, or they, do any. Our order of monks, it's a one of the branches of the Benedictine order, which has its roots in Saint Benedict, which goes all the way back, way back. Our congregation, the work of the congregation is to operate schools, is to run schools.
Oh, education. Okay.
Yeah. So as a lay person, I live here, on campus, which is sort of the grounds of the monastery. It's a boarding school. And so I participate in an extension of the work of the monks, right? So if you know anything about Benedict, the sort of the tagline is ora et labora, work and prayer. And so and of course the truth of it is that it's all prayer and it's all work, right? So but there's the work complements the prayer life of the monastery. So
The
as a
faith.
layperson, I participate that as an extension of their work and their prayer.
I so you may have caught this. I have my wife's family was her mom's family is very Catholic.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's cool.
Okay, so uh, I believe that her aunt is there a Benedictine in Nashville? Is there a
Oh yeah, yeah. The very famous, very thriving the Nashville. Well, there's Nashville Dominicans and there's Nashville Benedictines.
I can't remember which one she
Yeah.
is. She's a
Well,
nun
yeah,
in
it's probably Dominican, but there are orders of Benedictine nuns as well. But
so
Dominicans are, they are quite a thriving community there in
gotcha.
Nashville. Yeah.
So and then she had her other aunt was a nun and then released her vows and became Greek Orthodox.
Oh wow.
And then her 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 uncle is a retired archbishop. So
Wow.
like yeah, I am a former raised kind of Southern Baptist with some charismatic when I was very young, and
Yeah.
this is where we meet. And the other
Yeah.
interesting thing is that she has my wife has 3 other siblings, and they actually all went to a Lutheran boarding school. My
Oh
wife
wow.
actually didn't.
Yeah.
So, so there's like kind of this connection there. And I've got a buddy or a girl I went to school with who her husband's at a boarding school in Massachusetts called Deerfield. I don't
Oh
know
yeah. Of
how
course,
small. Okay,
it's a very well known, very established, very prominent boarding school for sure. Yeah, Deerfield's a real
okay.
deal.
So, yeah, I'm from a real neck of the woods place in Arkansas, but the world is smaller than we think it is.
Real quick, where in Arkansas are you from?
So I haven't like released that on
Okay,
here,
okay.
but
Well,
it's like, yeah, I was just gonna say it's kind of it's a little bit northeast, but it's nestled in the foothills of the Ozarks.
yeah. So when I
So
was a kid, I used to go to Arkansas every summer for
okay,
several weeks because in the extended family there was one of the grandparents had a little piece of land and sort of a
hmm
summer type residence,
hmm
and it was up. I don't know if it's right off the Little Missouri River, and it was on this thing called Lake Gleason.
oh,
Lake Greason, sorry. Anyway, so we used to go up to Alberts Pike, and
okay.
anyway, so I'm
Was
pretty
that in
familiar
the
with Arkansas.
Ozarks? Was that in the
Yeah,
Ozarks?
yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
yeah. So
Yeah,
Arkansas, yeah, it's an interesting state. I've been here for most of my life, but
yeah, yeah.
um, but yeah.
And
So
I'm from Louisiana, just so you know.
oh,
Yeah, yeah,
okay, so,
yeah,
all right,
yeah, yeah.
gotcha. So yeah, so this world, I think this little corner thing I kind of had mentioned talking about worship, and I didn't know you went to a monastery. I'm assuming what kind of mass do they do at the monastery?
Yeah, so the the Catholic Church. So it's just it's a so how do I say? Okay, so in 1968, the Catholic Church had a pretty serious reworking of their
Um,
liturgical life,
Vatican
and
II.
it's coming out of the Second Vatican Council. I think it's Summorum Pontificum. I forget exactly the name of the document. So I just lost all my trad cred. Um, there was a reworking, so they established the Novus Ordo, or the new Mass,
Okay.
or sometimes people call it the Mass of Pope Paul VI, now Saint Pope Paul VI, and basically it did all the things that you would so the masses takes place in the vernacular. The priest faces the congregation as opposed to facing east, ad orientem or ad populum.
Mm,
In fact, if you've ever been to a Lutheran service,
mhm,
it's Lutheran. I mean, I
mhm.
think that
It's kind of
uh,
a Protestant thing.
it is. It was very much
Yeah.
understood that way, as a kind of way of. I think a lot of the Council Fathers wanted to make Catholicism more accessible to separated brethren, right?
Mm,
And so I think it was a move to make it less. I mean, use this word because it does make a certain amount of sense, but to make it feel less oriental and less exotic. And I mean Oriental in kind of its classical sense,
The East.
Eastern.
Yeah.
Eastern, exactly. And so really it was a de-emphasis of the vertical and an emphasis on the horizontal, or the lateral. And so the church that I grew up in was the Novus Ordo. You know, I had no experience growing up
Mhm.
of mass that wasn't in English. You know, wasn't the priest facing us. You know, all those sorts of things. But I would have been one of the first. You know, I was born in 1973. In fact, today's my birthday.
No, happy birthday.
Oddly enough,
Happy
yeah, yeah,
Valentine's
funny.
Day, happy Ash Wednesday,
Yeah,
happy
yeah,
birthday.
yeah. And so I was one of those first people who was sort of born in that church, because this
Gotcha.
happens in, I think the document comes out in 68, and then like sometime in
Mhm.
71, I think it becomes promulgated all throughout the world. So that's all I've ever known. And so here at the monastery, to get to your original question, sorry, I don't want to I tend
No,
to take
that's
a long
fine.
time to answer questions. Um, it's the Novus Order, right? So the mass is in the vernacular. Now there's lots of different ways to do it, right?
Okay.
And so I would say that the way that we do it is very it's formal. You know, it tends a little bit more toward the Oriental or the exotic. So there's incense, and we chant
Gotcha.
certain parts of it. We do chant certain parts of it in Latin, but it's by the book. And yeah, so it's very solid. It's very solid in trad circles. In Catholic traditionalist circles, they would say that I go to a unicorn parish. In other
Gotcha.
words, there's very few of us, but
Yeah,
yes, I would say that. So I am not kind of the ones that you'll see, these crazy versions you'll see on YouTube of priests doing all kinds of outlandish things. So I go to a
sure.
very
Well,
traditional
gotcha.
Novus Ordo mass.
So I had talked to a priest not too long ago to kind of give me an idea about is actually Father Eric, who's kind of
Oh
floats
yeah,
around
yeah,
the place,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
about like the Latin mass. But I had about a year ago, I went to my niece's christening. My wife's brother converted to Catholicism when he got married a few years ago, and
Hmm.
um, I guess he was baptized Catholic. My wife was baptized Catholic, and they were
Hmm.
Catholic till they were 5, and then became Lutheran. But um, I was so surprised. I went in there, kind of lurking around and I picked up the order of worship because I'm kind of a nerd with that stuff,
Yeah, same,
and
same.
there was a song by a very modern guy that I know from my world, like named
Mhm.
Phil Wickham, and I was like, wait, what is this doing in here?
Yeah,
I
what is
was
it?
yeah, I was like that. I was not expecting that, but so I've been trying to get orientated to the worship wars of Catholicism because
Sure,
I'm very, very orientated and lived the experience of the evangelical Baptist worship wars. That was
sure.
my coming up and career even. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's a very different thing, but it's interesting. And I guess I'm curious from your perspective,
Mhm.
is it more uh contentious now than say it was 20, 30 years ago? That's something I'm curious about.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So like it depends, if your perspective is Twitter, or
Okay.
so the online lurking spaces where
Uh-huh.
these things get adjudicated and postured and all of that, then yes, it's a really, really
Mhm.
big deal, right? Um, and I would say that in the yeah, so the church definitely takes it seriously, and there's a decided perspective, let's say, of depending upon the regime of whichever pope is sort of running
Mhm.
the show. It has become a contentious issue, um, and it was certainly contentious when the changes were made virtually overnight. In
Mm.
let's call it 1971,
Mhm.
72. Absolutely super duper contentious.
Okay.
But there was an amazing widespread adoption of the new way of doing it. And it was largely greeted, I mean, largely vast majorities of the people greeted it as like, this is great. Like the church is updating, like we can make
Mhm.
it contemporary,
Mhm.
and all of that. There was a holdout crew that
Mhm.
were very unhappy about the changes, and they have had a remarkable staying power, very niche, very small, um, but they were, I mean, truly marginal. I mean, truly
Are you
marginal.
talking about the Latin mass? just
Yeah, the
maintaining the
Latin
lightness.
yeah, the original Latin Mass crew were extremely small in terms of just size and reach, and, stayed, that way. And then, so throughout Paul the Sixth, sort of, finishes. I think he dies in 78 or late 77 or early 78. And there was a very brief, pontificate of Pope John Paul the First, and he lives a month and then he dies, and then John Paul II takes over. And John Paul II was a not a liturgist. Like, he was that was not his sort of thing. He loved, it just wasn't his thing. He was a
Yeah, it wasn't
thinker.
his focus, yeah.
Yeah, he was a thinker and was very, very much was animated by evangelism, and was very interested in implementing the changes of the council, liturgical and otherwise. And so he was a gung ho. But even within those people who were looking to make the changes, there are different camps, right? But
Yeah.
John Paul II was not his thing, and so I would say, especially looking back on it, that there were, loads of abuses, liturgically speaking, that
Mm.
you know it was an issue. It was an issue. And so when Benedict the 16th takes over after a very lengthy pontificate of John Paul II, he carved it. He has a great work that I think even Protestants would really enjoy. It's called The Spirit of the Liturgy, and
Mm.
it's kind of it's a great work. It's really a brilliant insight into what liturgy is and how liturgy works and the spirit of the liturgy. And again, I don't I
That's
recommend it
John
to
Paul
anybody.
II? That's John Paul II?
No, that's
What's
Benedict the 16th.
Oh,
He wrote it when he was he, funnily enough, or everybody should know that he was the doctrinal chief, that served as the kind of de facto number 2 under John Paul II.
okay.
His name is Cardinal Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger,
So
and
he
he's
but he
German.
became Pope. I mean, he was the
Exactly.
previous Pope, yeah.
He becomes Pope, so he's the Pope's sort of right-hand man doctrinally and otherwise, and then when John Paul II dies, he is elected to replace John Paul II.
Well, and you know what's really interesting about that? Because 10 years ago, there was a big, while he was still Pope, there was a huge influx of Protestantism into the Catholic Church during that
Yes.
time.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
thinking that, we're kind of seeing, and now we're, in this space where we feel the Orthodox push thing
Yeah.
in this. And so, but what is that? I feel like it's in the title of Ratzinger's work. It's the spirit of the liturgy.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
a guy I was on staff with about 10 years ago, he was having existential theological crises and what
Mhm.
should I be? Who should I become?
Sure.
And he was a big fan. And he was writing a blog that, 5 people were reading online. And one of those 5 people happened to be Scott Hahn.
Oh,
And
wow. Yeah, of course.
so Scott reaches out
Yeah.
to my buddy here in
Yeah.
our little town in Arkansas. And
Yeah.
they start having conversations. And he's talking to me because I'm the safe guy to talk to Catholicism about because for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
yeah, totally.
and but it's interesting to hear that perspective because I was in another culture with
Mhm.
their own liturgical wars
Yeah.
going on related to kind of the same thing, but just on a hyper cultural level versus and
Well,
but
what
I
were they? If you could just lay it out for the ignorant Catholic here. I mean, how did those wars manifest in your communion?
so I was Southern Baptist,
Mhm.
and the Southern Baptist liturgy is songs and preaching and
Right. Right.
the altar call.
Right. And
And
that's
once
at the end, right? The
right, and
altar
once
call?
and once a quarter, it's the Lord's Supper.
Sure.
Our symbolic Lord's Supper,
Yep.
and so that's kind of it. You have music, and sometimes like a special song that a person sings or a choir sings,
Mhm.
and then you'll have the offering and preaching, and then preaching and a response to the preaching with an altar call and a song, and then a prayer. And then it's over. And so music is at least 30 to can you hear okay?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would say
Okay.
it's huge. Music is huge.
Yeah, so music is at least 40 to 50% of what takes place, and then it's preaching. And
Yeah.
so what happened with when rock music started to become to cross into Sunday morning worship, you were taking half of the meaning out of a certain generation's worship.
Yeah, totally.
So it's not, and I always kind of thought that maybe in the higher churches that the words weren't as contentious because my framework was for music. And within having all these other aspects of worship where songs were maybe 30 to 15% or something in a certain way, like of the liturgy versus 50 or 60% of the liturgy, that if you added in a modern song, it was such a smaller slice of the meaning of the whole. That's kind of a perspective that I was thinking about, and obviously, as I learned more about Vatican II and the Latin Mass and the Divine Liturgy and those types of things, I have a different perspective on it. But I think, the meaning was just nested into different things.
Yeah, yeah. So um, so like for instance, like you know, last Sunday at Mass, the closing hymn, right? So after everything's done and the priest says the closing blessing and they process out, we are singing "Shine, Jesus, Shine."
Ah,
Okay, so
like
like
60s or 70s or something.
yeah, totally right.
As a doxology or type ending of the service.
Well, it's so yeah. I mean, technically speaking, you don't even need. There's no such thing as like a closing song, right? It's sort
Yeah.
of it's a user option they would call
Okay.
it,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And so, so that has become like in the last 6-7 years, that has become one of the songs that the students like to sing for whatever for whatever reason, and it's
Oh,
funny, and I don't mind, like whatever, like it's fine with me.
gotcha.
I'm not a that stuff. That works, right? I'm not that doesn't get my knickers in a
Yeah.
twist.
Yeah.
Um,
That's what I mean by it not being as contentious in a certain way. But if you substitute the organ and the
mhm,
piano for a rock
mhm,
band,
mhm.
and it's all new music, maybe you do a hymn once every now and then. That
Yeah.
was such a it was such a contentious issue, and
So yeah, no, I get that, right? And I sure did you do like the youth service and the
yeah, I mean, so
layperson
I'm
service
30,
and
yeah, I'm 38. So
yeah.
in I started playing guitar when I was 15 in the late 90s, and
Mhm.
about a year after that, I was helping do music for like we call it the college service,
Yeah, okay, okay.
So it was like all these rock songs and then a sermon, and it was kind of happening at the same time. It was a ministry that was happening at the same time as our Sunday morning service.
Right.
So, but there weren't just college students coming.
Right, of course. Right.
So,
Right.
and then I had it would be like, oh, youth night on a Sunday night, and me and some of my buddies would be singing some Christian contemporary worship song, and like you could see the 60-year-old guy, the engineer, his face just turn red, and then at some point just get up and storm out.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I just didn't understand at the time how can you not see that there's kids, this is meaningful to these kids. But now as an older person, I just am like, man, I'm taking 60 years of his life and kind
Yeah.
of flushing it in a certain way. Not
It's a huge insight, man. I've literally just been thinking the same thing, because remember, like my perspective on all these things is like I never played the liturgy wars, right? That was just
Mhm,
never my thing.
mhm.
But I very much appreciate, what I'm becoming. I'm getting. I think I'm where you are, right? I'm starting to understand. So I'm just turning off my notifications.
Sorry.
I'm coming to understand that if I let's just say that I was 30 in 1971.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I'm 30 in 1971, that means that, I was born in what, 51, right? Okay, yeah. So I was born in 51, right? And so the world that I grew up in was, Latin mass, regular confessions,
Mhm.
there was, it was a very sort of like 100 Catholic hymns. It was like
Mm.
these
Oh,
were the
wow.
ones, right? And
Mm.
um, and I probably went to school with nuns and who were in the habits and priests who were in the Catholics, like, that was sort of my world. And all of a sudden in 1971, all of that stuff that I had grown up with, the rosary, all of these popular devotions, are virtually changed. I mean, in some cases, from Sunday it was all this stuff, and then the following Sunday was completely different.
Yeah.
Okay. And I didn't appreciate why people were so upset about that, because remember, the people that taught me in the faith were all those that kind of stuck around and were enthusiastic about this. Like, so
Okay.
you talk about you taught yourself how to play guitar, and you said you
Mhm.
did the college worship. So you're
Mhm.
like, dude, like this is great stuff. Like,
Yeah.
and then you're looking at the guy like, turn all red and then storm
Yeah.
out. And it's like what you didn't know. And again, it's not your fault, but
Right.
how could you have known that you're basically like doing a dance on this man's
Yeah.
lived experience? I mean, I've used
Yeah.
that
No,
experience like
no,
kind of on
it's true.
purpose.
His meaning, like
That's right.
a
Yeah.
deep, and that's a visceral memory that I have, and I wasn't even upset. I was like a little nervous. I was like, man, that guy's mad,
Yeah,
but,
of course. But you're a
and
human being, so of course
yeah, and
you
I
felt it.
experienced that over and over again. There's a buddy of mine. He's a dean of, religion department at my alma mater. I was at a Southern Baptist college, and
Yeah.
I got a undergrad in Christian ministry there. And when we were students there, we got asked to go do like a youth revival thing at
Yeah,
a,
yeah,
a youth and the guy was mad that he didn't use the King James version, and the guy
I love
who
it.
gave his testimony had a beard and had been a biker, and so the preacher was mad about that. And then, but I was long-haired hippie guy, but I was like, I got to find all my songs from the hymnal. I got to find all my songs from the hymnal because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's just I felt that so much in anyways. And he didn't
But
complain about me.
that's you, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that to me speaks of your temperament, as you're a reader and a sensor of people, would be my guess.
Yeah.
Right?
Some ways. Yeah.
Right. I
In
mean, in
certain
other words,
contexts, yeah.
like, you know, because some people are like, dude, this is what we're doing. Get on board. If you don't like
Yeah.
it, go
Yeah.
somewhere else. Because you're like, oh, wait, I'm trying to react. And maybe that's part of what might make you, I've never seen you perform, but I mean, I think, those people who perform for a living,
Hmm.
and I consider myself one of them as a teacher, oddly
Yes.
enough. I
Yes.
mean,
You get on stage. Mhm.
I can feel that. I mean, I can walk into the classroom and I know, I can just feel it. I don't know
Mm.
who necessarily it is, but
Mhm.
I can feel whatever the energy is, and I
Yes.
absolutely tack to that, and either I lean into it or I work around it.
Right.
So I'm
Right.
I'm reacting to that. Yeah.
Yes. But so that's just to say that I'm interested now as I hear about so many evangelicals moving into the high church, and even in myself, I'm now in a community, and everyone can have opinions about whether doing a church in a home is appropriate or not.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
we're all on a journey. Let's
Yeah,
just leave it
yeah,
at that.
yeah.
Uh, but I prepare liturgy. I prepare a more formalized liturgy than I ever have. I had my wife do an antiphon this past Sunday, which
Beautiful.
uh, was Psalm 51.
Mhm,
And that's because when we were in high school, we recorded that because she was like, I always love this part of church,
mhm,
and she would sing. She can sing very well, and so she sang,
mhm.
"Create me a clean heart, oh God."
I
And
love that. One of my favorites. There's a
yeah,
great simple plain chant of that. I don't know if it's a great. I love it. It's one
so
of the. In fact, that's a. I just sorry. That's
no, it's okay.
you know how you have certain things that sort of like
Yeah,
pop around in your head all the time.
triggers something. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That is one that I regularly find myself going to, and even chanting that out. Anyway, so sorry. Anyway, but I
Well,
love it.
we played it, and we had it recorded 20 years ago or something. And her dad's a doctor, and he would play our songs during operations.
Mhm. Wow! 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 Wow!
That was
Wow!
one of them that he would play, but it came from her Lutheran background.
Yeah.
And and I don't know if my daughter, who's about 14, had ever heard it. And so we were rehearsing it a little bit together, and she goes, "Wow, that's so haunting."
Mm, mm,
And
mm.
and
It
if you look
is.
at the context of that verse, it is a haunting
Yeah.
verse,
Yeah.
but I am moving. I have moved. A part of my story with worship too was so in 2012 when I was still a pastor, um, a worship pastor. We hired a ordained Presbyterian, and in this church that had been kind of more Baptist, and there was some of this talk of liturgy in the Baptist world, the Reformed, quote unquote Reformed,
Yeah.
Southern Baptist people were getting into that, and I had been having liturgical conversations and doctrinal conversations with my in-laws for 10 years before that.
Yeah.
So I was completely primed to like, let's play with this. And I think there's something here. And then there's this guy named J.K. I'm blanking on his last name. He was at Calvin College, and he wrote a book. He started writing about liturgy in a way
Oh
that
yeah,
was
yeah, yeah. James K. Smith. Yeah, yeah,
Smith,
yeah. Of
yes,
course. Yeah.
kind of as your life, but also in
Right.
worship. And there was another
Totally
guy.
great. I love it. I love that stuff. Yeah. I mean,
There was another
that's.
guy.
I mean, it's a very old Catholic thing
Oh
that
well, right,
Smith
right,
is
right.
playing with.
I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah. That's so cool.
I'm not
Yeah, you know what?
claiming
I
it
know
was
that.
a new idea,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the the people that I was in contact with, and then a guy named Mike Cosper, who's now an
Oh yeah.
editor for Christianity Today. He had his first book was called Rhythms of Grace, and it was about
Oh, I love it.
liturgy actually. And so I was taking all this in, and then I liked how so much of it wasn't about me. Even if I was
Mhm.
doing it, it almost was like the liturgy was another thing
Yeah.
that was outside of me. And then,
You
then
should
obviously,
talk to Father Eric about this, because in my conversations that I've had with priests about this, that like in my opinion, the
yeah,
holy ones, the ones who sort of I think really kind of get it, will talk about it. It's you really feel, we have all this instrument, Lord, make me an instrument of the Holy Spirit, make me an
yeah,
instrument of your grace. Like, Augustine talks about this in the Confessions, that there is such a great tradition of the priest understanding themselves, you know, not as the musician, but as the instrument, right? Not
yeah.
as not as the instrument, not as the musician, but the trumpet or the the guitar or what have you, right? And I wonder if you as a musician, you must have had that experience. Like there are times where you're playing the guitar, but there's also those times where you feel like I'm just like
It
something's
felt
working through me.
well. It felt more like that with. It's hard to say. There's other parts of my story that I would say that maybe I lost touch with that for a while in my
Yeah,
life.
yeah,
So, um, but the liturgy actually gave me a lot of peace because I felt like these aren't my words.
yeah,
This
yeah,
and
yeah,
and when it was not me, I was glad because in that culture and in that world, and it can be mapped onto, you can have a priest that makes something about themselves,
Well, I
but
have
like
stories. I have stories. Go ahead.
yeah, but when I knew that I was struggling with something so deep
Mhm.
that I was thankful to give the church to actually something that wasn't me.
Yeah,
And that
yeah,
was the liturgy that I was a
yeah.
call to worship, a confession of sin. We're going to say the creed. We would go back and forth between a confession and a creed every week.
Okay,
And,
okay.
and so, um, and then we would do like a prayer of illumination for the word and the reading of the word and those types of things. And so, I mean, it was a light liturgy. I'm building on that with this community that I'm with now. But anyways, I know we could, I might reach out to Father Eric about that in the future. I was curious about you, kind of like how you kind of got into this space. How did you get into this little corner? What's your connection? Because I saw you on Grimm's channel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. So
Or how'd
part
you
of
get on YouTube as well? Like, yeah,
yeah,
all that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I've been teaching for a long time,
Mhm.
and you know, part of so much of what animates me and Grimm has been great, actually sort of reminding me of this or helping me see it in a slightly different way. But I've been motivated for a really long time that, I very much felt when I had my reversion to the faith, so I
Mhm.
was raised Catholic and we were a devout family. My mom and dad
Mhm.
remained devout, and they go to mass every day.
Mhm.
And so I went to a very normal, like, sort of Catholic school world, and I got a very, what I would say now was a very MTD version of Catholicism, not from my parents, but from the schools that they sent us, that they entrusted us to raise us, in the faith. Moral therapeutic deism,
Gotcha.
which
I know
which
all
is a
about that.
yeah, and it's great. I was like, it's such an important frame. Anyway, so
Yeah.
I very much got that. And as a result of that, I realized, or I made at around 16 and a half, 17, let's say, I made the very quick kind of calculus where I was like, look, if what you're saying is true, I will no. Like, I don't need to get up on Sunday morning. I can go to a soup kitchen from time to time if I want,
Mhm,
because it's all
mhm.
about, social justice, and it's all
Right.
about, helping the poor. Again, that's all true, right?
Yes.
But I really don't need to mess with this mass thing. And frankly, the demands on, the moral demands are really kind of lame and stupid. And I really don't need any of that in my life. I'm going to protect my peace, and I'm not Catholic anymore. Right. So I wouldn't have said that I was a full blown atheist. But I was definitely into Jesus loves me as I am. Like, that was like,
Okay. Yeah.
that was cool. Like, I'm down with that. And so, and besides, my thinking, my really snotty thinking at the time was, besides, people who are Christian are dumb, right?
Yeah.
That was the sort of what I had kind of downloaded from the surrounding culture, that Christians were dumb, and I'm not dumb. I don't consider myself a dumb person, and therefore I'm not really a Christian. So I did that for about 2 years. I was a fairly serious teenager. I like to have fun too, but I was a very serious kid. Um, in part, I think it's because my mom and dad took religion so seriously. I think that
Right.
that imparted on me that
Yep.
something more mattered, right? So that was sort of the pattern. Anyway, so I left the church, and that was all kinds of. I would treated my parents really poorly. I I cringe when I remember some of the things that I said to them and some of the things that I did. But at any rate, when I went to college, I started reading great books.
Mm.
I was in an honors program at LSU, and I'm like, oh, like, this stuff is, like, there's a lot of stuff that I don't know.
Right.
So it was a great anyway, I had a couple of good professors, and I wound up, doing a super deep dive into the great books. And I realized that, people like Augustine existed, and people like Shakespeare existed. And my gosh,
Yeah.
I encountered this guy, Thomas Aquinas, who's probably like the
Yeah.
smartest person that I've ever encountered in my life. These guys were Christian and Catholic. Like, I'm not smarter than they are, so I have to give it a shot. And so that really prompted me on some kind of deep dive into all of that. So therefore, as a result of that, I had a pretty serious reversion, which was very much fueled by intellectual
Mhm.
inquiry and curiosity.
Mhm.
And then as I started to read more, I started to encounter, and then I encountered, this is interesting to your original question. So I went up to this small little Catholic liberal arts college up here in New England. And for the first time in my life, I went to a mass that was extremely serious
Mm.
and reverent. And for the first time in my life, I had heard all my life, of course, that this is the body of Christ, and this is the blood of Christ, and this is what
Yeah.
the Eucharist is. I'd heard all those things, right? But this is the first time that I experienced a priest who seemed to really believe it,
Yes.
and
I
that
hear you. Mm.
blew me away. I'm like, whoa, this is not casual. This is actually kind of taking seriously what we're allegedly take seriously. So that really blew me away. And that's when I really first started taking liturgy seriously. But to your question, sorry, to your
That's right.
question, I have been motivated by what I see as a miscarriage of justice, in so far as I was part of a generation that was interrupt the cultural transmission, and I mean cultural just in terms of just culture, right?
Mhm.
Broadly speaking, but also theologically, in catechism and liturgically, got cut off from my inheritance and my tradition. And so
Mm.
I would say what animates me as a teacher and
Mhm.
as a father is to find ways to reclaim and to reconnect us kids. I teach kids every day, and my own kids, to
Yeah.
reconnect us with this vast tradition that is not bones but is flesh and blood.
Yes.
And so
Mm.
so to me, that's the purpose of liturgy, right? So it was, in some sense, I had grown up in this very horizontal, lateral world, liturgically speaking,
Yep.
intellectually speaking, culturally
Yep.
speaking, and then
100%.
all of a sudden I get hit with this influx of the vertical, and
Of
I'm
the
like,
sacred and the
whoa.
holy. Yeah.
That's right, in the cruciform, right, and all this sort
Yes.
of stuff, right? I'm like, oh wait, and so if you notice, and I love this that image, right, because not only does it grab uh, God in the heavens, right, but it also it grabs the dead, right, and it's
Yep.
sort of this,
Mm.
it's a really important thing, and so. my sense of liturgy transformed basically in that experience where I'm like, oh, this is important.
That's
And
I was on a stream with Grail Country a week ago, and I was just in there for a second, but they were talking a lot about worship, or maybe in Paul's channel.
Yep.
It really, really matters. There's this whole argument about propositional
Yep.
beliefs in this space,
Yep.
but this is not the same thing as I don't know how to parse it, but it really does matter what you believe. It matters.
Yeah. Right. It's not nothing, right? It's not nothing. Yeah.
It really does matter if you believe that there's something happening here.
Okay. So for instance, if you want me, I can give you an example of way this is currently warring out in Roman Catholicism.
Okay.
So a couple of years ago, there was a letter put out called the Traditionis Custodes. And it was basically Benedict the 16th, 12, 15 years ago or maybe more now, had reopened so that Catholics could actually go to a Latin mass. And there were all these sort of separated groups that it was an attempt to kind of draw them back into the mainstream of Catholicism.
So it was anathema to go to a Latin mass for a while?
Oh, yeah. Oh, very, very much so.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
Oh,
very,
wow.
very much so. In fact, it was illegal.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Ecclesiastically illegal to do that.
Right? Okay.
Oh yeah, no, this is some serious stuff, right? And so, but Benedict the 16th, I think, in his explorations through the spirit of the liturgy, understood that you can't just abolish it, right? You lose that sort of continuity. So anyway, so he reopens it back up, with the idea, at least originally, that they're sort of to bring these people back in, these separated people back into the fold, and they'll kind of, maybe they'll influence a little bit of the Novus Ordo folks, but maybe the Novus Ordo folks will influence them a little bit, and we're sort of big tent, right?
Yeah.
Well, what happened is that the Novus Ordo kind of starts stalling out. In a large part for the reasons that it stalled out on me.
What timeline? When would you put that year-wise?
Of the Benedict the 16th reopening the Latin Mass?
The stalling of Vatican II.
Oh, well, I mean, really, from, again, roughly, let's call it, there was an initial euphoria in 1971. Right. It degenerates, in my opinion, to sort of banality upon banality throughout the 70s and into the 80s. So by the time I'm a full-blown kid, by the time I'm a full-blown kid in the mid 80s, it's a liturgical mess. There's all kinds of abuses. It's and again, like, folk music was like the thing.
Right.
Like folk music. And look, I like actually the Byrds and all. I like all the folk music. I was a student of pop music, and so I like all that stuff, but it's so passé, right? It's so lame, right? It's like, really, like, so at any rate,
easy.
So, yeah, right. Totally. So I think that when Benedict reopens the Latin Mass, I think people like me, like, experienced it, were like, well, wait a second, like, that seems real. That seems really quite serious. Like, why are we doing tambourines and BS pop music from the mid 60s? It's like pre-rock and roll folk music. Like, what are we even doing here, right? And so I think it had the effect then of people got exposed to the old Mass. And like, well, the old Mass seems real, and this other Mass seems kind of dumb and not real. And so you had a situation in your hands where the current Pope Francis, says, you know what, we're going to shut it down. And so now they shut it down, basically.
They shut which one down?
The Latin Mass. They shut the Latin Mass down because the Latin Mass was growing, like, actually. Yeah. So
when was that? When was that?
2 years ago. Wow. Yeah. So 2 years ago. Not even. And somebody can fact check me on the dates. You can put in the comments. I don't pretend to have a Wikipedia like memory. But so shuts it down. And so this affects me, technically speaking, not at all. Right. I go to a Novus Ordo monastery parish, like, whatever. I didn't do it. But people in my extended family, my brother is a Latin Mass. His whole family is a Latin Mass family. My nephew, all my nieces and nephews are Latin Mass Catholics. And all of a sudden, this Mass that they've been formed in from the time they're roughly, like, their whole life, actually, now that I think about it, gets taken away, and they're told that they're the bad guys. So it's a hot mess. Okay, it's a hot mess right now.
It's interesting, the time scales, because I think even with the where evangelicalism is, there's like a 20, 30 year cycle right now.
Yeah. Okay.
Lagging.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So I was exposed to some of that, and I'll tell you that in just a second. But I just want to finish up the Latin Mass, the war
Yeah.
going on right. So what happens? So when the Pope sends out this letter and shuts all this sort of stuff down, all of a sudden people are making arguments about what they understand liturgy to be, right? And so the argument then becomes: is the liturgy fundamentally about God, or is the liturgy about us, right? So, and again, how you propositionally answer that question really matters, right? So that if you understand so my conception of the mass is that the mass is something that is offered by the priest on our behalf, the church's, the church's behalf,
Mm-hmm.
to God, right? Right. But if you don't think that, if you think that the mass is for us, then why is the priest have his back to us, right? Why
Right.
is he doing all
Right.
that? Why is he speaking in a language that none of us speak,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera, right? So you start to kind of see why what you believe actually matters. And so, yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of put
It's
that
a
out there.
top down, and it's a top down thing.
Yeah.
Now, but
Interestingly enough, ironically enough, it's a top-down thing arguing for a sort of horizontal, lateral
well,
view
yeah,
of liturgy.
I would say that the bottom is arguing it for, or something
Yeah.
like that, maybe actually. But I don't know. That just that's what's
I didn't catch that.
on to. Oh, are you still there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was
Can you
just saying
repeat it?
that's what's happening. That's what's going on, and that's what I feel is like happening across the board.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we're talking about belief, but we're not in some ways talking about doctrine. We're talking about practice,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that is almost a deeper mode of meaning than the proposition than like a large scale proposition. They all still exist, but what we're talking about is the doing. And to me, that has been the question, and that actually that we I think Protestants, especially like more heady people that get into these arguments about these things that are up here.
Mhm.
I call worship a compression of the transcendent. And
Okay.
so, like,
Mhm.
that's actually what matters in the lived experience or the lived reality, like the doing of together.
Well, I
And
mean, liturgy, I believe, means like sort of it's like
the
work
work
of
of for the
people.
people. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I find that fascinating because it's physical,
Yeah.
it's embodied.
Right.
That's
So that, yeah,
Go ahead.
and but you really see that, again, with like the Latin Mass in particular. You can certainly see that with um the divine liturgy of the Orthodox, that this you stand, you sit, you kneel, you do all, you're doing you're physically doing things. There's such a wisdom in that
Yeah.
that gets leveled, when
It's just intellectual assent.
yeah,
That
right, right,
that's what I
right,
feel like I'm pushing back against is it's just intellectual assent. That's what we say in the reformed people when you talk about solely faith alone.
yeah, sola fide,
We're saying that we're kind of saying it's intellectual assent. That's
yeah,
that's actually what we're kind of saying. And I don't know, I don't fit in that anymore. Um,
yeah,
I feel like it is a it's it's both, and that's the crucifix thing too. I think that,
yeah.
but I mean, we've really hit worship hard today. um,
Well, yeah. No, I do. I think your instincts are absolutely right. I mean, I think one of the things that I think that, look, most people are not theologians. I'm not a theologian, right?
I'm not.
You and I read that stuff because it's sort of the thing. It animates us, but that's not. I think that we have. I mean, I dare say, almost fetishized the intellectual. Um,
Yes,
in substitute of the ways in which liturgy forms us
yes,
into an us oriented toward God, right? And so I think that's what, to me, the richness of the Latin Mass, in my tradition, is precisely that it is you know we we tend not to understand the costs of a thing
Mhm,
until we
mhm.
are years past.
Yes.
We're like, we shrug our shoulders like, oh, we'll just like change this and change that. Like what could possibly go wrong? But we never really mean that. We never really ask that question. What could possibly, what could this cost us? We never ask that until we're way down the line.
Yeah, it's a simple. I've talked about this in a completely different setting. So in Arkansas, back in 2003 or so, the governor said if your little county school can't maintain 300 kids K through 12, then you have to assimilate into one of the larger school districts
Got it.
because that's where the opportunity is. That's you're going to get. And the unintended consequences, that was just, it was a simple idea.
Yeah.
And I lived that. I didn't, it was in my community. I went to a small county school,
Yeah.
350 kids. It was basically the whole town. It was the center of the whole town. It gave the town identity and culture.
Yeah.
And when
Totally.
you took that out, and then these kids all get lost in this big school system that then gets overwhelmed
Yeah.
and can't actually be, the education level actually comes down.
Yeah. It's a totally, you see that. It's such an interesting, that like is a pattern, right? That is a
Yeah.
classic pattern of not actually running a full accounting of what could possibly be.
Yeah,
Where
we're
you
only
only see
like,
plus side. It's
yes.
all upside, as they say. Well, really, it's not really all upside.
And so when you said that, it made me think about the office of confession. And way early in our conversation, you said something, and I don't know if you were talking about in worship or actually the practice, the sacrament of confession is what you were talking about. Which one were you talking? What were you talking about?
Both. But I think I was referencing like actual confession.
Okay,
Like
so tell me
the
about that.
sacrament.
Tell me about that.
How it works.
Well, no, that is it not practiced, I guess is what I'm asking, or is it?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there's been a radical de-emphasis on the sacrament of penance or reconciliation or confession that kind of goes by these three different terms. But
Okay, this really interests me.
oh yeah, okay. So get this, right? And this is like, I don't even know what I think anymore, but I just lay it all out here. It used to be the case, right? Or it actually still is on the books. But basically, in order for me to commune, right, in order for me to receive the Eucharist, I need to be in what Catholics call a state of grace,
Yes.
right? And so sin operates in sort of two primary, but overlapping ways. There's venial sin, the sort of the normal run of the day sins of like I get angry or whatever,
Mhm,
and then
mhm,
there's mortal sins, right? And the
mhm.
way that the Catholics understood this for a long time was that venial sins, like kind of besmirch you, but they don't cut you off. A mortal sin cuts you off from God, therefore mortal, right? And so, in order for me to receive communion, I need to be in a state of grace. And in order for me to be in a state of grace, I have to go to confession to receive absolution for all of my mortal sins.
Okay.
Okay, right? So you can see it's very systematic, right? It's a very
Yeah,
sort of, it's
it's a
very clear.
it's systematizing something that I think is absolutely human.
Totally. Yeah. Right. And so any quibble that I have with it is not the spirit of the thing is
Right,
absolutely correct.
right.
Right. I do quibble a little bit with the sort of the bean counter version of this that kind
Yeah,
of gets it turns into a kind of highly hyper scrupulous bean counter type thing. I joke with my wife and my friends about this all the time, and my mom, like, I am not a terribly scrupulous person. Like, I don't mean that I know when I do bad things. I don't mean it that way, but I am not someone who obsesses over, did I really mean it when I said that? Or, did I, was I, I just, that's not the way I work. Maybe I should be more scrupulous, right? Fine. Okay. You can make that a sort of argument, but I know people who have suffered mightily by
mhm.
a kind of scrupulosity that
Yeah,
kind
religious
of bean counter
scrupulosity,
can
it
really
hurt somebody,
can
and
absolutely, yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And some of my very good friends and family members, like they suffer from that. And so so when so you can see why the de-emphasis on the kind of bean counter model was not necessarily a bad thing,
Yeah,
right? But what has happened is that now nobody goes to confession,
right.
right? And in order for me, so it used to be in
But
certain.
everybody goes to therapy, just so you know.
Well, interesting, right? I mean, because that's
Yeah.
a liturgy unto itself, right? And
Well,
again, it's an MTD God, right? Not against therapy as such, but fine, okay. So,
me either, by the way.
yeah, no, and I didn't take you to mean that, but I know what you mean. But it is a cultus, right? And it is a liturgy.
Well,
So,
it's a substitute for the very human thing that confession is. I believe
right.
in, and it's worked in my life that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And
Right.
where I didn't feel like there was an office for that.
Did you catch, I don't know if you saw Paul's show when he was talking about the it was that retired pastor, he was a kind of a mega church pastor, and
Van
they were
Van Donk.
what?
It's not Van
Not Van
Donk.
Donk. No, no, no. It was a YouTube, it was a commentary video, and he was
Oh,
talking
okay.
with, a pastor who had been up, I think, in Upper Northwest, but then moved down to Southern California. This is
Oh,
like maybe
John Mark
that's
Comer.
it.
Yeah,
Coleman,
I
that's it.
put that clip in a video
Okay,
before Paul.
oh, that's so funny. I gotta give you credit, gotta give you credit. So,
That's my pride coming out. So
there it is, there it is, that's right. It's almost unavoidable. So, and, what does Paul kept saying, like, "I know, I think he really means this." I love the way
yeah,
Grimm is clipped, as well. Um, but, oh, yeah, but, interesting, right, that, they go to
a
therapy,
way.
right?
Oh, yeah.
They
Therapy is a
they
way
go to therapy.
to heal. The way to heal. Yeah.
Yeah. So at any rate, so now, like, so it used to be the case where because in order to receive communion you had to be in a state of grace. Many parishes for many years, right, and you still see this in some parishes, like in Rome. I remember when I lived in Rome for several months, that 30 minutes before every mass, a priest would be in the confessional, usually on the
Mm,
side or the back of the church, and people would line up, to go to confession so that they could properly
participate.
receive,
Yeah.
properly prestige.
I think that's an incredible liturgy, actually.
Oh, I wish. Oh my God! I mean, yeah,
So
absolutely.
I what's your time? We're coming up
I'm
on an
good.
hour.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm
Okay.
good right
So
now.
what I want to say to that is I was having lunch with a friend the other day, and he gave me this book. I don't have it back here. She's actually a Calvinist, but Obama was reading this book back in, like, she's from Iowa. I can't remember. She kind of had a little bit of a flash in the pan
Mhm.
in that time. But I read this section on the Logos, and she was talking about, oh man, I think I've lost what
We were talking about confession. We were talking
confession
about.
word. Well, I think I've lost the thought, but the office of confession. The practice. Okay, no, it wasn't that book. He was telling me he was at Tulane, and my friend was getting his I guess he was in a master's program for medieval history,
Yeah,
and he had to come home because of Katrina, was not able to finish that.
yeah,
But
yeah.
he was saying that he read this very small book that was actually saying that there was what was going on during the Middle Ages, the 200 years of the Reformation, that we don't talk about. Is we talk about all the heady things, but what was being practiced by the
Yeah,
church?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
it's this real small book he was reading, and he said that actually this author believed that the biggest part of the liturgy was actually the passing of the peace before Eucharist, that it was
Mhm.
actually the reconciliation between the church and the people, that it was actually, that was like a super maybe holy moment
Yeah.
during that time. So this comes from this Yours Truly podcast is
Mhm.
about my journey with becoming a truthful person. I had
Mhm.
some deceptive tendencies in my life that I hid, and that's why. And I had kind of this mystical experience that
Mhm.
I saw Abraham, this dagger, and this kind of thing that gave me the courage to tell the truth about something I was most deeply ashamed about in my whole life. And so partnered that with then a journey of becoming truthful about maybe transgression as a practice in my
Yeah,
life,
right.
and not just these evangelical accountability groups that
Positive.
you're not actually you're telling somebody else to maybe assuage your guilt, but I don't.
It's also it can very easily become a performance too, right?
Well, all of it
Yeah,
can.
yeah,
But but there at least was an office for it within the church, and that is now, at least, well, in the traditional Catholic sense, there was
yeah,
an office for the act of confession.
yeah.
And I feel like, and you're actually confessing to a person, and I think I would take it one step further. Actually, my father-in-law, well, somebody I know, I've already said it. He was having at his previous church had some, I guess you could say, disagreements with the pastor, and he withheld himself from communion.
Sure.
Like he practiced it until he could either reconcile it with that within himself or with that person.
Yeah.
And I respect that so much. We don't have practices for it outside these are the things we talk about getting lost, maybe in the Reformation type thing. But even in the Catholic Church, some of these things are getting lost, I feel like. And we substitute it with therapy, and thank God for it that they're, and my therapist was a Christian, but I don't know. I just think there's a massive thing there.
Well, I think you're right. Paul always talks about, opponent processing, and that, with the Reformation and the Reformations, and the Counter Reformations, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a way in which we opponent process each other. And
Yeah.
so you very much become, that which you're allegedly fighting or something. And so, my quip as a Catholic has always been that we're all Protestants now, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we have opponent processed our way into, we're basically all by default Protestants, and therefore, well, what do you do with that, right? Well, I think one of the things that all of us Protestants, right? You can see what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
All of us Protestants have to find some sort of ways to establish accountability, because it's very easy, and I'm telling myself this, and I fail at this. It's like, how comfortable am I, with not reconciling myself? And so I submit myself to these practices. I as much as it annoys me, like I submit myself to finding somewhere to go confess my sins, and it's Saturday afternoon at like 3:00, like really? Okay. But I try to submit myself to these things, that because I know I'm such a heady guy. Like I know, I think very highly of myself, obviously.
Sure.
And I'm trying to fight those sorts of things. And so part of the way in which I do that is I submit myself to things even that I don't necessarily like agree with, or like, let's say that I think my pastor's an idiot, which I have before.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not submitting myself to like him qua him. Like I'm submitting myself to the office and to the authority invested in the office, right? And in a way that I know I need to do that, because otherwise I will become a monster, because I am a monster, right? And so submitting myself to the discipline of going to the little confessional, and and I actually am a big fan of the screen. I don't know if you know anything about the mechanics. You can, in most parishes now,
from Hollywood.
Yeah, right. So in most parishes, you can elect to go face to face, or you can elect to go through the screen.
Yeah.
And I've always been really uncomfortable with the face to face, and I think originally that was just because I'm uncomfortable saying things out loud. But now that I'm not, I'm a grown man. I do the screen because I don't know.
It's a real thing. It's a real.
I don't know how
they're there, right?
Yeah. Well, and I'm a teacher. I'm a performer, as I joked about earlier, and I am, right? And I'm pretty good at it, and I'm very good at making people feel at ease. I'm very good at, for lack of a better way, like I can be charming.
Yeah.
Okay.
100%.
And so I'm aware of that, and I know that there are times where I need to stop with the charm, and I need to be real, and I need to stop being this sort of performative self. And I found when I would go into the confessional face to face, it would be sort of like, hey, father, like, oh, I'm so,
yes.
like, and then you sort of have that sort of moment where I'm watching myself do this thing. I'm like, Kale, you're in confession.
Yeah.
Why are you trying to charm the priest?
Yep.
Like, do I really think I'm that special?
To me. Yeah, that makes so much sense to me.
Yeah.
It makes it its own office.
Yeah.
And it also makes it physically separates you from the person.
Yeah.
And And I think that I heard you, I was listening, kind of prepping for this. You were talking, it was a recent podcast. You were on another guy's channel who I think I saw he was on a live stream with Paul not too long ago. I don't remember the name of his channel or his name. He's a theologian, I think, in the Catholic Church. You
Oh,
were just
Larry, yeah, Larry Chap, he's great. Love Larry.
yes,
Yeah,
very
he's
chap. And
fantastic.
you said that language is a sacrament.
Mm.
In that, I don't know, you
Yeah.
were talking about as a teacher and these works, but even in there is something to the saying of the breathing of the phono-ness
Mm.
of hearing you say what you are guilty of.
Yeah,
There's
that's
a
right.
there's a reality to it coming out of your soul. You know, I
Yep.
mean, I don't know how else to say it. That's how I experienced it and continue to experience it. But, um, you know, yeah, that office is,
Well, think about that, right?
mm,
So in Catholic, sort of just Catholic formulations, a sacrament is an outward sign of an inner reality,
mhm,
right? And so if as I made the claim with Larry, that language is a sacrament, so that
mhm.
language is the thing, and it sort of represents a thing beyond and above or below it, and it
Underneath
is
it,
through
maybe.
underneath it, right? And then through that, it manifests itself in a kind of supernatural way. So that my contention is that so for instance, so to be um, uh, not literal, Paul, not literal, but to be honest about it, right?
Mm,
That a Catholic believes that the wafer, right, the consecrated wafer,
mhm.
is both a sign and a reality, right?
Yes.
So that it's no longer just or merely a
Mhm.
piece of bread, but
Matter.
rather it is sacramental, right? So if you I remember growing up and really encountering this concept of the sacramental and being blown away by it, because I had been taught this very sort of flattened,
Mhm.
that material reality is
Right.
it, de facto it. And so when you start thinking sacramentally, right, that you, Christian, like you're a sacrament, right, that
Mhm.
that that I'm a sacrament, right, that
Mhm.
that that we manifest more than just the this bag of water that
Imago
you
Dei.
yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That we are icons of the
Mhm.
living God, and so that has huge implications, right, for us. And that's when you start to see the kind of, I think, the profundity of sin, right? And 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 so that I think what you're getting at with confession is that confession is this very mundane seeming, very like just very it's a
Archaic
mechanism.
even.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there, but there I am, like, I'm on my knees and I'm
Mm.
doing the examine and I'm scrolling through all the shitty things that I do
Yeah.
in my
Yeah.
life, right? And
Mm.
I have done and I continue to
Mhm.
do, and I feel shame about the fact that I keep doing the same darn things over and over again. And I swear I'm sorry, even though I know this priest has heard me confess these things,
Mm.
how many times. And it's like, but I actually am sorry. Like I actually am. And so I'm humiliating myself, right?
Yeah.
But to do this, but I'm not doing it to Father Pete or to Father Stan or to Father John. Like I'm doing this, like there's this, I'm participating in a liturgy, right? Like
Yep.
it's so much larger than just sort
It's
of
a
this
work.
moment.
You're participating in a
Yeah,
work of worship,
yeah,
and it's holy and it's sacred, and
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's just and sacred is like a root to sacrament. I don't know, those words go together for me. I don't know,
Oh,
kinda like
totally. Yeah,
trust and truth do for me as well, and
yeah.
I don't know, man, that that's been when I came back after to a really traumatic event in my life, and we started doing the confessions of sin and worship,
Yeah.
I felt like it needed, which I'm not opposed to, I still do, like a corporate confession, but that like the personal office of it, I
Well,
think
look, we're constantly trying to weigh this interaction between the one and the many, right? Like, so
mhm,
this is
mhm,
classic
worship,
philosophical
yep,
sort of
yep,
consideration. Like, what does the one have to do with the
corporate
many?
versus individual,
Right. And so, to me, I think true religion, right, is going to actively seek the zone over which that contradiction is constantly dealing with, right? And so I find that the various, if we want to call them heresies, although a little fast and loose with the language here, but the heresies are when I overemphasize the one at the expense of the many, or I overemphasize the many to the detriment of the one,
Oh, I
right?
like that.
So for me personally, right, I have a hard time with what I call sort of social justice Catholics,
Mhm.
because to me, it does not take seriously the profound call by God to me.
The sin of the individual as
Right.
well. Mhm.
Right. So for me, there's a hierarchy, I should say. I believe that, ultimately I have to answer for myself. I'm going to have to render an account for me. I don't have to first render an account for my brother, but I also have to render an account for my brother, right? But to me, there's an order of operations here, that in order for me to make a to stand at account for me, I know that that is going to imply my brother and my sister, my wife, my coworkers,
Right.
Paul, everybody that we know, Grim, like everybody. I know that, but it comes from me first. Now you can get into all some crazy stuff about, is there even such thing as an I outside of a we? Right? There's no such thing as a we without a collection of eyes, but I would argue that you don't even become an I until you have to deal with the other, right? With the I thou, what is that? Buber, I think, talks a lot about this. But
Mm.
anyway, you can see that there's this real tension between the I and the we. And
Yep.
I think true religion hovers over that zone and
Yes.
tries to solve that problem. And I think it's
Yes.
ultimately an intractable problem. It's an unsolvable problem. So you have to kind of live in that tension between those two things. And so we should seek to order our worship and to order our prayer so
In
as
our
to sort of
lives.
and look in the Catholic tradition, we would talk about this in terms of the communion of saints, right? That the communion of saints is that there's of course the image, in, I guess it's in
Apostles'
the
Creed.
well, I would go to the Apocalypse and just say that
Oh,
that we are that the Sanctus Sanctus Sanctus, holy 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 Lord God of power and might, it's etc. Right, that if that is the true telos of where we're headed, right, in this pilgrimage, right, we're headed toward, we want to be part of that heavenly host, right, the communion
mhm,
of saints,
mhm.
then that reconciliation starts now,
Yes.
right? So that I am a religious person, or I attempt to be a religious person because
Yes.
I know that I'm practicing for the
Yes.
game,
Right.
right? I'm practicing
Eh,
to be a part of that heavenly host singing in eternal worship, holy, 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 right?
I guess to kind of bring this around,
Yeah,
and we can kind of like this can kind of be our
yeah, yeah,
touchdown
yeah,
a little bit is
yeah,
to me when I hear that I've heard recently Jonathan Peugeot talk about the mode of worship isn't actually the Old Testament; it's actually Revelation,
yeah,
which you mentioned the apocalyptic vision
yeah.
and
That was a huge revelation for me personally. I was like,
yeah,
oh,
it, and so I think that I'm interested. Like, so what influence has have some of these guys had on you?
like
Peterson,
Pajot
Peugeot,
and yeah.
Verbeek, any just in general.
Yeah, all of them, profound impact. I'm a pretty heady guy. I read a
Mhm.
ton, and have been reading since I was, essentially I've been reading, like an adult since I was 19, we'll call
Yep.
it.
Yeah.
And I'm 51 today, so long time. What the impact that they have had on me is that they have given me, in one sense, like affirmed some of the things that I had sort of grasped at already, but they have helped me understand both my meaning crisis, to
Mm,
use Vervaeke's frame, but also the meaning crisis that I see in my kids.
mhm,
And so they have helped me both as teacher, but also as student, right?
mm.
So that I think I can better sense about where they are coming from. Pajot's great because um, he's taking us all back to the Middle Ages, right? And there's a
Yep.
way of seeing that we have forsaken, the discarded image that
Mhm.
C.S. Lewis talks about. He has given me a way of sort of seeing it. It's like I know those things, but man, to hear him just sort of say it, it's great. Like I love that. Vervaeke for different but similar ways, right? With the
Right.
language. But Paul, to me, Paul is a miracle, man, because
Mm,
he's so clearly and obviously like a mensch. Like he's just a great guy. He's a good
Yeah.
man. I've met him in person, so I can attest to this in person. He's what you see is what you get. And I love WYSIWYG guys because there's not a lot of them out there, and he's one of them. And he, you know, it's to meet another Christian who is as serious about the theological claims of our faith, but is also open. It was like that's me too. Like I was like, oh, I so it's okay. Like I can be that,
Yeah.
and because I've always sort of been wholly like, why am I so weird? Like, why am I like, why do I can like listen to anybody? Like it's not a
Mhm.
threat to me.
Right.
But ultimately I think that they've just given me new ways of and affirmations of sort of the things that I've been kind of grasping at and groping at, and then just seeing in the lab that my classroom is,
Mhm.
seeing it with the kids that I deal with. So but I would say that, you know to your questions, to your larger questions, your quest here, I think, to me, the future is liturgical. And so I think that for whatever reason, in God's either active or permissive will, we have opponent processed ourselves into very interesting ways. But I do believe that the future is liturgical. And so I'm
Yeah.
not at all surprised to hear, Christian, that you are sort of finding yourself pulled back into some sort of pattern that you don't have to create every week. Like I would imagine, like I hear about you, as a pastor, and I can't, how utterly exhausting would it be to be a pastor without a liturgical tradition? So I'm not surprised that Protestant pastors burn out, or that Protestant pastors find themselves in really sticky situations. Like I get
Talk
it, like
about the individual. Talk about a balance with
yeah,
the individual. That
totally right,
it's not just a burnout, but it's moral failings across the board.
totally right. And look, obviously, you don't have to, just pick up a newspaper, and it is very true in the Catholic Church as well. So this is not me throwing Catholic bombs,
No.
from glass houses. But at the very least, I think the what the liturgy, properly understood, should afford us is the opportunities that it's not about me, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
You
that was
know,
my
you
experience. That was my experience, and
totally.
and still is in such a way.
And I
Yeah.
think I think for me, like, because people will ask me all the time, "Well, Kale, did you ever think about becoming a priest?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." I was a serious, man in my mid-20s, unmarried, and absolutely, I was attracted to it, and I do think that on some level, I think in His wisdom, God did not grow that thing that it was sort of on my heart, because I think that I'm very prone to making it about me, and I think it's very easy for priests to
Yeah,
make it about them.
sure.
um
In
you
spite of
know
everything we've just talked about, but yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I do, because as there are always wrinkles within wrinkles, that you can always, and I teach my kids this all the time, like with literature, it's never underestimate the power for self-deception.
Of the
Like you
dark
should,
side.
yeah, you should always respect, evil's evil, and you need to be able to call it what it is and see it for what it is, but never forget that, you can even lie to yourself.
Yep.
Lying to others is easy,
So,
like
yeah,
whatever. But the self lies, and I think that, to yours truly, right? I mean, I think the self lies are absolutely the most damning ones, because it's the ones
yep.
we can't see. It's
And
the
they
ones
just
we
they
can't see.
destroy you. They
Yeah,
destroy your soul.
right, right,
100%.
right.
Yeah, man. I don't know, man. I love how hearing, the future is liturgical. I believe that, and I think that what this world that we're experiencing even right now, I'm saying that the digital is eating the walls. It ate music, it
Mm,
ate
mm,
movies. It's eating the walls of the church right now.
mm. So true,
Because
so true.
they're just like dissolving, and you just, oh well, there's Kale over there in the Catholic
That's right.
Church. There's
Yeah,
John
yeah,
over there, and here's Christian, kind of this post evangelical guy, and it's like, well,
yeah.
what is going on? Um and I also agree with how you were saying, like, a serious person about these things, but open. I'm not near as bookish as a lot of people in this space when it goes.
Mhm.
I have a very I'm a pattern recognizer, and so I
Yeah,
I hear these things, I hold on to all the top level stuff,
yeah,
and I see how they all generally kind of can fit together in a way. I'm not you know we can talk about I could talk about a few basic ideas about Kierkegaard or Freud or something, but I'm not like a deep. I mean, I won't ever claim to be deep in that stuff, but I engage with them and how they engage, like across the top. That's how I feel like I operate with that stuff.
Well,
And
I was just going to say, like, it's very easy I believe that if you learn one thing from the Old Testament, it's that human beings are idol making machines.
Oh yeah.
Right. And we can turn almost anything into an idol. And we have turned almost everything into an idol. And all of those are always ultimately substitutes, right, for the Lord. And I am very acutely, consciously aware of it is so easy for me to turn the intellectual life into an idol. And so and you could also turn religion into an idol, which
Yep.
is something that nobody really ever wants to talk about, but it absolutely can
Oh,
become a substitute. It's your golden calf, right? So
right.
perhaps what you sense is that there's no need for you to be a self-fashioned intellectual, nor with
Right.
me, right? But can you see patterns, and can you see the ways in which you are currently, me, you, others, are forming our various golden calves as we
Mm.
speak. And that's the kind of thing that keeps me up. Like, where is my golden calf, right?
Yeah, it's I was having that conversation with my wife about this, in the way that it's like I actually feel so much more balanced because there's a part of me that's was always building things, and I spent a season having to rebuild a foundation of my life, and that part is not fun. Building the foundation of anything is not really fun. The fun stuff is the interior decorations and the walls going up and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like that's what this is kind of, and I want to be able to kind of keep it with that understanding that the foundation is what's holding this all together,
Yeah.
And but man, Kale, we're kind of coming up on
Yeah.
close to an hour and a half, and man, I was nervous. I've got another podcast scheduled for next week, and I'm nervous about him because like I said, I have this insecurity about not being the deep guy with the books. But this has been a very, very, very wonderful conversation, and I appreciate your time, and like just jumping into the worship stuff was that's really been more of my experience, my lived experience and stuff. So thank you for meeting me.
You're welcome. And we didn't even get a chance to get into the whole Catholic charismatic thing, which is a whole other type of worship that we could have gotten into. Well, it's a real thing. It's a real
probably
thing.
Because I'm not really super charismatic, but
well, just insofar in the Catholic world, the charismatic renewal is where you see the overlap with praise and worship music and all that, right? So that's where I get it. It's like why I know Third Day, for instance.
There you go. There you go. That takes me back to the
yeah.
Wow. Well, on that note, man, thanks again, and stick around, and we'll win this thing backstage.
Sounds good. All right, take care, man. Go.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.